Tonight on MovieCat, we're watching the 1995 home video release of Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction. Orson Welles would have been so proud. Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction was the Fox television pseudo-documentary that accompanied the Alien Autopsy hoax film that was made a couple of years prior. The TV show was produced by Robert Kiviat and Peter Green and directed by Tom McGough. The show is built around the Alien Autopsy short film that was made in England by Ray Santilli and Gary Schofield, along with special effects artist John Humphreys. The TV show was hosted by Jonathan Frakes of Star Trek fame and interviewed many people from medical examiners to Kodak film experts, from Hollywood special effects wizards to people who claim to have witnessed strange happenings in Roswell, New Mexico as children. I'm watching the Lionsgate Region 1 DVD release from 2005. I recall watching this show back when it was first aired in 1995. Back then, they didn't show the full autopsy film and only had censored clips of the film. I thought it was interesting, but forgot all about it by the next day. The show, however, did make a pretty big impact and landed on the front page of magazines and newspapers around the world. In rewatching the show, I'll give it a D for general viewership. Even for the 90s, it's a very poorly produced TV show. The mainstream TV viewer was the target audience for this show, but for UFO freaks and avant-garde film fans, it ranks a little better, and I'll give it a C. I'll explain why in a little bit. There have been many faked news programs and documentaries through TV, radio, and cinema history. Most notably Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, and more recently Ghostwatch or the Blair Witch Project. But also every reality TV show, political propaganda, and cryptozoology report. The list goes on, and we could spend a lot of time trying to categorize them. The common denominator for all this is that they aren't true. Sometimes it seems as though there isn't anything real in media at all. And from certain philosophies on communication, that might be the case. But there is also an element of deliberate deception happening with these shows. These documents are distinctly different from a news report that is simply mistaken or manipulated to favor one side over the other. When it comes to Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, the presenters go out of their way to not take responsibility for the conclusions that the audience might make, while at the same time strengthening the narrative that the Alien Autopsy short film is the genuine article. The reasons for this are fairly obvious. The pseudo-document genre is simultaneously troubling and revealing. On the one hand, our built-in shortcomings are continually preyed upon by grifters, con men, and plain old liars. But the success of these shows can tell us a lot about the nature of how we learn, how and what we believe, our strengths and weaknesses, and perhaps most importantly, what we can do to safeguard ourselves. Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction is divided into 6 sections, or acts. In television parlance, an act is the program time between commercial breaks. The original broadcast in August of 1995 did not show the full black and white short film that was made by Ray Santilli. Instead, they only showed select clips from it. Also, the clips that were shown were partially censored. This was done in part because of the graphic nature of what was filmed, but it also added an air of authenticity. The autopsy film, which is about 17 minutes long, is included in the Lionsgate DVD. Jonathan Frakes is the host of the show, but he is only on screen for intros and outros of the acts. For the rest of the time, he simply narrates. Of course, this was a less expensive way to go since Frakes was a TV star at the time. All of this gives the show a very patchwork and cheap feel. The first act begins with a warning. You might think it would be a warning about the disturbing nature of an autopsy, but instead it is a disclaimer stating that the show you're about to watch expresses opinions and theories. In other words, don't sue us. When Frakes first appears on screen, he gives another warning that the Santilli film is rather grisly. The show then gives a rudimentary history of the 1947 UFO crash in Roswell, New Mexico. They interview 3 people who were in Roswell at the time and had some kind of connection to the military base there. They describe seeing debris that was taken from the crash site. In Act 2, the show introduces Ray Santilli and his story about where the film came from. He describes searching for old movies in America of rock concerts. He states that he was offered the film by a former Army cameraman. He also gives some explanations as to why he won't reveal the cameraman's identity, citing the mysterious man's wishes to remain anonymous. Strangely, the show immediately says that they have hired a private investigator to find the cameraman, completely reversing the reasoning for respecting the cameraman's wishes. Act 3 gives us the first extended clips of the autopsy film. The show goes back to the crash debris witnesses, and they give some more testimony about what happened in the days after the crash. The show also tries to build a sense of sympathy for the aliens. After all, it's a pretty traumatic thing to crash land on an alien world. Midway through Act 3, Frakes changes the direction of the show and focuses on trying to authenticate the physical film itself. They interview a technician at Kodak, a famous Hollywood cinematographer, and a retired Navy cameraman. For Act 4, the show interviews 2 different doctors, both of whom are medical examiners. The doctors try to come up with possible real-world medical conditions that might explain the alien as if it were a deformed human. The show then switches gears and interviews Stan Winston and his team of Hollywood special effects artists. They come to the conclusion that if it is a fake, then it is an incredible piece of movie magic. In Act 5, the show begins to wrap things up. They revisit the private investigator who is optimistic about finding the cameraman, but apparently never does. The show revisits most of the people they had previously interviewed, and they all express their desire to learn the truth about alien visitations. The sixth section is really just an epilogue. Jonathan Frakes gives a dramatic what-if speech. The basic conclusion of Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction is that the Santilli film is either the most important piece of documentary film ever released, it isn't, or it is the most elaborate hoax ever put to film. It's probably not that either. On the DVD, the full 17-minute autopsy film then appears. It includes some footage of crash debris that looks appropriately sci-fi. Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction is a fun show to watch and think about. It's fun to engage in UFO fan playfulness, and there is a giant subculture of UFO-related activities and toys and books and shows. An entire mini economy has sprung up in Roswell based on aliens from beyond, also known as tourists. However, it's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. That is to say, it's fun if we take it for entertainment, but a lot of people in the UFO subculture do not. As Fox Mulder would say, they want to believe. A part of this fan phenomenon are people that live in delusion and denial, which is a topic for a different channel. That said, there is also a large section of the UFO culture that believe in aliens because they have seriously weighed the evidence. They have taken in whatever testimony is available to them and come to a logical conclusion that aliens crashed near Roswell in 1947, and at least one of them ended up on the slab under the knife of an Army medical examiner. Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction relies on one chief aspect of human psychology in order to pull one over on the audience. It has to do with how we know things, how we acquire knowledge. In his book, Research Methods in Psychology, Dr. Paul Price of California State University describes 5 modes of obtaining knowledge: intuition, rationalism, empiricism, scientific method, and authority. Taking things to be true because an authority or expert says it is so is a basic way we come to understand the world around us. Dr. Price states, perhaps one of the most common methods of acquiring knowledge is through authority. This method involves accepting new ideas because some authority figure states that they are true. Much of the information we acquire is through authority because we don't have time to question and independently research every piece of knowledge we learn through authority. We know the Apollo missions landed men on the moon because of the historians that recorded the events. We have plenty of reason to believe them, but if we didn't, we could go about the arduous task of building our own rocket and traveling to the Sea of Tranquility on the moon and checking up on the landing site of the Apollo lunar module, just to make sure. This would basically be switching the mode of acquisition of knowledge from authority to empiricism, and this is a totally valid prospect and is a huge part of the scientific process. But building our own rocket is a pretty big task, at least for most people. However, there is another way, which is to vet the authority figures that give us the information in the first place, to find out about them and their methods and basically see if they are trustworthy. The 17-minute autopsy short film by Ray Santilli utilizes several techniques to try to appear authentic, such as the period artifacts in the operating room, the telephone, the instrument tray, the clock. Supposedly, they shot the film on period-correct stock, but how can the audience really tell? Suspiciously, the medical examiners are wearing masks, and there's no concrete credentials put forward. But all in all, it's a reasonably competent staging. The TV show Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction, on the other hand, is a full-blown commercial stunt piece, and the executive producer, Robert Kiviat, is very clear in his use of authority figures to convince the audience that the autopsy is real, beginning with a celebrity endorsement from Jonathan Frakes, then moving on to modern medical examiners, professional special effects artists, and cameramen, along with former military cameramen, not to mention the eyewitnesses. None of these people come out and directly say that the film is real, but they infer and suggest and surmise. Kiviat covers any and all possible angles of scrutiny of the film. The show is one expert after another. It is true that the experts that were interviewed in the show are in fact actual authority figures. Stan Winston was in fact a great Hollywood special effects master. Dr. Milroy and Dr. Wecht are real doctors. Alan Davio was a real Hollywood cinematographer, etc., etc. Each interviewee gives their thoughts about the autopsy film, but their testimony always stops short of confirming its authenticity. Also, the show only shows you those experts from their interviews that support the show's thesis. Stan Winston, for instance, later said that he had expressed doubt about the autopsy film that never made it into the show. We rely heavily on sources of authority to gain knowledge and help understand the world around us, and this is understood by those that want to mislead us for whatever reason, usually profit or power, or maybe just for the lulz. And while listening and believing authority figures is not a bad thing, it can be risky. Of course, being too skeptical can also stall our understanding. We live in an age where we are drowning in misinformation, where the old methods of authenticating information are losing their effectiveness. What's the answer then? That's a difficult one, and maybe there isn't an absolute solution, but being skeptical in a reasonable fashion and employing multiple modes of learning is certainly a start. We also have to be aware that the media such as movies and TV and internet and everything else can be used to inform or deceive, or maybe a mixture of both. I don't think we should question authority so much as we should research authority. But on the other hand, if all we do is tear experts down, then we are left with only ignorance. It's important to keep an open mind, use common sense, and employ critical thinking. At any rate, we are now required more than ever to engage our brains and put in effort. Good luck to us. If I consider the era in which this TV show was first broadcast, I have to give the show a D. If I were to watch it as a current TV show, it gets a D. For the really devoted UFO fans out there, I can only give it a C. The plain truth of the matter is that it's just not very good. Weird, yes. Gross, yes. In a good way? I think the main problem with Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction is that it isn't bad enough. It was a show that was intended as a grift and not as entertainment per se. I think if the audience were to get to a point where it could be shown under new circumstances, then it might be a lot of fun to watch. For example, if someone were to throw a 1990s retro-themed party and they played Alien Autopsy Fact or Fiction on an old CRT TV, that would be pretty cool. The TV show is very poorly produced, with very low-quality graphics and a collection of interviews that were shot by various cameramen around the globe. Most likely they were local freelancers that were recruited because they lived in whichever city the interviewee was located, so there's no unifying look or style. There is also a lot of stock footage that is used, which is obviously unrelated to the subject, but has been recontextualized to fit. Whenever possible, the producers have inserted shots of newspaper headlines and even used radio news broadcasts from the 1940s. Again, the point is to build up credibility, not the truth per se. Santilli's autopsy film is a much more interesting piece of media. It is mysterious and silent, it projects a mood of great seriousness and consequence. What is actually happening during the autopsy has been pretty thoroughly debunked, discredited, and disproven. But what is interesting about it is what it says about us and how our society works. Forget the whole speech about our stupid place in the universe, blah blah blah. The Santilli film illustrates how our nation functions in the face of a great happening, or at least how we think it would function. We suppose that it has all kinds of clandestine operations to control the media and silence the leakers, while it gathers information about science and technology, the likes of which only Hollywood could fathom. How we think our government operates is quite a different affair than how it actually works. At the end of Alien Autopsy, Fact or Fiction, there's a section where the many interviewees express their desire to learn the truth. In the show, they're talking about the supposed truth about alien visitations, but I would suggest we refocus our wishes and endeavor to learn the actualities about how we and our government behave during very important events. Hey movie cats, I'm just a puppet, but there are real cats out there that need your help, really. Please take some time to locate the cat shelter that is nearest to you and make a donation. And if you're in need of some love, as we all are, you can adopt a cat from that shelter and improve your life, as well as the lives of our feline friends. This week, Movie Cat is highlighting this shelter. Thanks so much for your help.